This episode of The Overwhelmed Brain is brought to you by Total Restore. If you want to finally tackle your leaky gut, just watch the video at healthygut1.com. That's healthygut1.com. Life presents the toughest challenges. Every day you are faced with decisions that test your ability to express who you really want to be in this world. We're told to keep saying affirmations and keep thinking positively, but what do you do when that stuff doesn't work? Welcome to The Overwhelmed Brain, where you'll learn to make decisions that are right for you so that you can create the life you want now. Hello and welcome to The Overwhelmed Brain. My name is Paul Coliani and I'm here to help you increase your emotional intelligence so that you can avoid dysfunction, handle toxic situations with grace and ease, and show up as your authentic self. Everything I talk about in this show is my personal opinion and is meant for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult a medical or psychological professional before making any changes that could affect your physical or mental health. I got an email a few months back that I would probably normally read on my other show, Love and Abuse. That is the emotional abuse and control and manipulation podcast that I do at loveandabuse.com. So if you're in a manipulative relationship or you think there is emotional abuse going on, check that out at loveandabuse.com. I'm not going to read that email on that show. In fact, I'm going to take a little snippet out of the email that I received and address it here. And it's narcissistic behavior, the type of narcissistic behavior that we might allow somebody else to do to us. And narcissism is a huge grab bag full of unfortunate behaviors that can be quite elusive to our emotional radar. We may not be able to see it or detect it or understand what's happening. All we know is that something's not right here. Maybe we don't know how to defend ourselves, or maybe we can't get through to the other person. We can't push whatever thoughts that we're having out into the world so that they can understand it, because it seems like they always come up with something that one-ups us. You know, they say something that is more logical, more rational, and we can't find the right words to convey what we want to say back to them, so we get stuck. And there are people in the world that do this very well. There are people in the world that you cannot have an argument with, that you can't talk to in a normal, rational way, that won't look at both sides of the issue. All they're doing is saying things in a way to keep control of the situation so that they're on top and you're not. You know, that could be a narcissistic tendency. It may have nothing to do with narcissism, but I see that as a form of abuse, a form of emotional abuse that will often make you feel bad and them stay in control. I mean, that's kind of how I define emotional abuse anyway, is when someone does something to you that makes you feel bad, especially about yourself. Not only do you feel bad, but you feel bad about yourself. And they have ways to do it. They have learned how to use language in a way that puts you in your place. And when you run into someone like that, it's hard to get your side of the story in. It's hard to get your arguments in. It's hard to get the facts in, because they'll turn it around in some way, or they'll manipulate the conversation in some way that puts them on top. I mean, let me give you an example. Let's just say that you're talking about money with this person and you say, we have enough money to afford this because, we bought, something extravagant last week. We bought something extravagant last week, so why can't we buy this, which is what we need? And that person will say, it's not about the money. It's about you always trying to make me feel bad for what I buy. Now, what I did there is I immediately did a redirect. I immediately made you think of something else besides the argument that I know I'll probably lose. So I don't want to talk about money. I'm being the person with the narcissistic tendency here. I don't want to talk about money. I want to talk about this instead because I know I can win this argument. And so you get into conversations with these kind of people And what ends up happening is you end up losing, because then you get stuck on the direction that they take you in. And this is what I want you to be aware of. I want you to be aware of when this happens in any type of conversation with anyone. And, I've been in these types of arguments or conversations where someone will redirect me, causing me to be emotionally triggered about the subject they're redirecting me toward. And then we end up talking about that subject and not the one that was originally brought up, which could have been so basic, could have been easy to just discuss and get over with, but they didn't want to lose. And so this is what you're looking for, is when someone doesn't want to lose and they redirect the focus off the subject at hand, then you might be dealing with someone who knows how to manipulate a conversation to always win. So this is a good tool to have in your tool belt, just in case you are finding yourself stuck. And what I mean by that is when they say something that you don't even know how to reply to it, you feel like you can't find the words, or you know the right words, but they twist them in some way. It could be on the verge of crazy making, or it could actually be crazy making or gaslighting. If you've not heard those terms, go to loveandabuse.com, you'll find those. But those types of behaviors cause you to feel a certain way and cause you to feel like you can never get your side of the story and you can never win. Not that you're looking to win. Sometimes you're just looking to have a reasonable, rational conversation with the person. So when they direct it or redirect the conversation, you find yourself in a place that you have trouble getting out of. That's because your focus is now on the new subject at hand, which they brought up. In the example that I used, the person I'm talking to brought up something about money and extravagant purchases, and why can't we purchase this is something we need. And me playing the role of the manipulator, if you want to use that term, immediately redirected to a hot button of yours or an emotional trigger that I know will get you riled up in some way, or I know that you will feel very defensive about. That's another thing you look for, is like, are they making me defensive on purpose? Are they putting me on the spot so that I'll feel defensive, so that I'll have this strong desire to defend myself instead of talk about the issue at hand? I mean, these are the things you think about when you can detach from the emotional outcome and focus on the factual outcome. It's hard to do because sometimes these are people that we're in relationships with, that we have emotional ties to, that we believe know us better, that love us more than they say they do, or maybe they do love us, but they're using tactics that they may or may not know they're using, but they just want to win. And how does that make us feel? And they know we'll end up in a place of defeat. So they'll keep using this, not realizing how much damage they're doing to the relationship or fully realizing it. So there are people out there that do it consciously, and there are people that do it because that's what they've done all their life, and that's how they keep control in their life, and that's how they maintain their level of comfort and security in life. So we know people that want to feel secure, so they always walk around with their defenses up. And when their defenses are up, their coping strategy is to change the subject or transform the conversation in a way that puts them on top. Because I guarantee, using my example, if that person defended themselves against what I said when I was role-playing, that I would probably find a new angle. Because then I would say, you know what, you're just like your mother. There's another angle. I'm redirecting again. Now we're twice removed from the original topic. This is what happens in arguments. I mean, you probably can relate to this. This is what happens, is that it turns into something else. And after 3 or 4 or 5 times removed from the subject matter at hand, suddenly it's not about the toothpaste cap or leaving the toilet seat up or whatever minor annoyance or irritation it was in the beginning. It's no longer about that because the person doesn't want to be wrong or they don't want to talk about it for some other reason. So they change the subject in a way that causes you to be triggered. If you're triggered, you feel like defending yourself. That's the natural response. I got to defend myself because I'm being triggered, and I don't want them to think that I am the person they are describing me as. Come to think of it, I think I did that this morning. I was triggered by something my girlfriend said, and I was like, I don't want her to think that I am that person. And I said something like, you are grouping me with other people that don't care. I said something like that. And I realized I was doing it, and I realized that we weren't really connecting, and something that became quite heated. But fortunately, I was able to just kind of drill into what's really happening here and try to connect where she was. And it was hard for her to connect where I was, but she did that too. We both tried to connect where our thoughts were at the beginning of the conversation and where our thoughts are now. And we both did try to keep it on target. Sometimes it's hard to do. Sometimes it's so hard to keep it on target because it seems like, this is for some people, it seems like it might be easier to just bring this other topic up so that you can convey how wrong they are somewhere else. That will add ammunition to your argument and put them in a weaker position. This happens in politics. I'm not going to mention any names, but it does happen. And when it does, you can see the outcome. The outcome is usually the person with the most skill of language and manipulating outcomes will typically win, because the other one will be befuddled. They won't know how to reply to it. Sometimes they'll just think, that's ludicrous. This isn't even about that. It's about this. And then the other person will elevate it to something else or relegate it to something else, and it will turn into an entirely different conversation. And suddenly there's no closure for the person that really wants to get their point across. So anyway, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because the snippet in this email that I'm going to read you really made me think that a lot of us deal with this. A lot of us believe that the person that we're talking to is probably reasonable enough, rational enough to have a conversation about a subject matter that might be emotionally charged, yet we should be able to get through it, because otherwise, why are we talking about it? When we bring up something that has an emotional charge to it, we're bringing it up because we want some closure. Maybe that closure is you want the other person to finally admit they're wrong. Maybe that closure is you want to just get it off your chest because you've been holding on to it. Whatever the closure is, we usually bring something up because we want closure. Because if we didn't, then we wouldn't bring it up. There's a point where you don't care about the closure, meaning maybe it's just not important enough to talk about, and you don't care if the other person believes you or they don't, or thinks you're right or thinks you're wrong, because you get comfortable in yourself where it doesn't matter. That, talk about elevated, that might be an elevated place to be, where, you know what, this subject doesn't matter enough. It doesn't matter enough to talk about it, especially with someone who you know is going to twist things. And I look at that as, you know what, I'm going to take the higher road. I'm going to look at this situation as not important enough to bring up with that person. Now, I think you should bring up subject matter that is emotionally charged when you need closure. It's just that you can't do it with everyone. You can't do it with all people. You can only do it with open-minded people. You can only do it with caring people who care about your well-being, who care about your mental state, who care about you as a person. You can only do it with those kind of people. Otherwise, if you do it with someone that you know is clever at manipulating language, manipulating the outcomes, then you also have to realize that you're digging a hole that you yourself are going to get stuck in, and they will be fine as they fill that hole with their own dirt while you're in it. You don't want to be in that hole, so you have to pick your battles. Am I really going to bring this subject up with this person when I already know the outcome? You want to be smart in a lot of these cases. But then you might be stuck. Like, I have to bring this up. I have to talk to this person. What do I do when this person starts to say these things or redirects me? Well, when we come back, I'm going to read you that snippet and I'm going to tell you what you can do. There are things that you can say to make sure that you always keep it on the topic, to make sure that you don't go down the rabbit hole that they want you to go down. Because if you do, then the whole conversation will be pointless, because all you've done is make it worse for yourself and keep them where they want to be, on top, in control. And you've not only gained no closure, but also gained more stress and more heartburn and more anxiety and whatever is building up in there. It's hard to get rid of when you're dealing with someone like that. How do you get rid of it? I mean, how do you make sure it doesn't build inside of you? I'm not going to lie to you. It might be impossible with some of these people. Some people may not have the ability to be open-minded. So like I said, you got to pick your battles wisely and figure out, okay, is it worth getting into this conversation with this person? And of course, that opens up the bigger picture of, is it worth even being around this person? And we're not going to focus so much on whether you should stick around someone like that or not. We're not going to focus on if you're in a relationship with someone, if you should break up with them or not, if they're that way. What I want to focus on in this episode is learning not how to stuff those emotions down and learning what to say in the moment to at least give them, this is going to sound awful, a little harder time trying to manipulate you and put you in your place so they can stay on top. So what I want to focus on in this episode is really helping you keep your power against people that want to take away your power and have power over you. Specifically with conversations, arguments, and anything else that comes up that you always seem to maybe lose yourself in. Let's see how we can unpack that right after this. Digestive troubles, weight gain, low energy, achy joints. If you've been struggling with any of these, Dr. Stephen Gundry says you're not alone, and he knows the real cause. Dr. Gundry is one of the most famous and well-respected diet experts in the world, and he says that most of these problems aren't about lack of exercise or even genetics. The real cause is leaky gut. Leaky gut happens when you eat certain foods that contain lectins, which are tiny particles that tear holes in your digestive tract. These particles then wreak havoc on your insides, causing poor digestion, fatigue, achy joints and muscles, brain fog, and even worse health issues. So what's the solution? Well, you just need to know a few foods to avoid, and Dr. Gundry has made a free video describing exactly what they are. People who have watched the video have reported more energy, smoother BMs, slimmer waistlines, and a stronger, healthier body. If you want to finally tackle your leaky gut, just watch the video at healthygut1.com. That's healthygut1.com. All right, like I said, I want to talk about how you're in a conversation with maybe a controlling or a dominant person, or maybe just a liar. I mean, who is this person that you're talking to? Someone who especially likes to redirect the conversation to put you on the defense and to keep themselves out of the spotlight, out of your focus, out of your investigation, because they don't want to be caught, or they don't want to deal with the responsibility. They don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to take the blame. They don't want to take the fault. So they'll do everything they can to get out of that spotlight and put you in the spotlight, probably for a different reason. So what that means is you ask the question, "Where were you last night?" for example, and they say, "You always ask where I was. Why do you not trust me? It's like ever since we met, you have not trusted me, and you're always trying to paint me into a corner." And so now that comment can redirect the focus back onto you. And depending on who you are, you might go, "What? No, of course I trust you. I just want to know where you were last night." And, it could hopefully end there. And they say, oh, I'm sorry. I just got triggered because of the way you asked it. That would be a nicer way to reply. But I'm not talking about those people that reply like that. I'm talking about the people that reply and don't want to be caught, don't want to take responsibility, don't want to have to answer your questions. And so what they do is they redirect the focus back on you, put you in the spotlight, and now you have to deal with that because you're emotionally triggered. It's like they say something like I just said, like, you're always nagging me. How about that? And you now have to defend your nagging. It's not really nagging. It's just asking a question, but they're going to turn it into nagging. They're going to say things like that, and they're going to hope that they hit your hot buttons. If they hit your hot buttons, now you're being questioned, and it's time for you to take responsibility for what you did. And that's a rotten place to be because you're probably wanting to find out what's happening with the other person, and you just want closure. How do I get closure? I just want to have a conversation with you. I can't tell you how many people have either written to me or contacted me or people I coach with. They'll say every time I bring this up, he or she turns it back on me. And now we go down this other path of all this conversation and all this anger. And we never actually got closure on what I brought up. And so that's a dominating, controlling, manipulative person that does that, or at least the behavior is dominating, controlling, and manipulative. And these people have been doing it all their lives, or at least most of their lives. They learned how to do this from a very early age, I'm sure. And because they are so adept at it, it's very difficult to have a normal conversation with them. So this can be for anyone. This can be for a loved one. This can be with somebody you work with, someone in the grocery store. It could be anyone. And so we just have to have our own tools, our own resources to deal with people like this, to talk to them so that we don't lose our power. And that's really the focus of this episode is I don't want you to lose your power in the conversation. Now, I'm not talking about typical arguments. You can have an argument, you left the toothpaste cap, is a dumb example, I always use it. You left the toothpaste cap off again. You always do this. And then the other person comes back and says, what's it matter? It doesn't matter. It's not going to dry out. You're actually talking about the toothpaste cap and you have two different perspectives and the subject stays on the toothpaste. And of course, all anger kind of has an origin that has nothing to do with what you're talking about anyway. It could be about toothpaste right now, but really they're angry about their request not being respected or something like that. And that's when you can have a more productive conversation or argument. It's nice when it goes that way, even though it's tough, because when those words come out, well, you do this and I feel disrespected, then the other person can go, oh, I didn't realize you felt disrespected. I thought you were just being trivial or something like that. And then maybe you can kiss and make up or whatever. Then life goes on and you figure each other out. That's how you learn through arguments what each other's values are when you don't know them. It can be helpful to have an argument because sometimes you have to get emotionally triggered first so that you can understand where the other person is. If you're not emotionally triggered and you're holding it back, maybe you're a people pleaser, maybe you don't like confrontation. If you hold all that stuff back, then you never get anything resolved and the other person doesn't know what you want. They don't know what you need. They don't know who you are. And then the relationship goes sour. Or at least one of you holds resentment for a really long time and you never find closure, you never find resolve. But anyway, my point again with this episode is to help you learn how to keep your power in a conversation with somebody who either wants to dominate, control, or redirect. And the redirect is usually on you or on something else. And I have a few things here that I'm going to go over and I'm just going to read them to you and comment on each one as we go. But let's just use the example, where were you last night? We could use any example, but let's use that one because that could probably incite some heated conversation. So here are some pointers that when you ask a question like that or have a confrontational conversation like that, we want to be careful of those people that drain your power and avoid the conversation. I'll call them power drainers. You've heard them energy vampires, although that's a little different. But the power drainers are the ones that take away your ability to honor yourself, to honor your boundaries, to honor your values. I mean, people can't actually do that, but we tend to let them sometimes. So we want to watch out for these people that can drain our power. So one of the first things is when someone redirects the subject and tries to put you on the defense, you can say, all right, if you think that's a problem, we'll talk about that next. However, let's finish this conversation first. So what I'm saying is when you ask, where were you last night? And they say, you always ask me where I am. You don't trust me. You never trust me since the day we met. You can say, all right. I didn't realize that's how you felt. Or if you heard that before, we'll talk about that next. But let's just say you never heard that. They pulled it out of their bag of tricks. All right, if you think that's a problem, we'll talk about that next. That's very important. So let's finish this conversation first and talk about that next. So they may not like that because they don't want to be in the spotlight. I'm talking about people who are trying to avoid talking about last night, for example. But that's one thing you can say. Okay, you know what? Let's talk about that next. For now, let's finish this conversation first. And they may retort something like, I want to talk about it now. You know what? You never trusted me. I want to talk about this right now. And you again remember to bring it back to the subject at hand. So you could say, no problem. We absolutely will. As soon as you answer that question, and then we can talk about that. So you're just bringing it back. Remember, bring it back. And I know some people are very difficult to do this with, but just remember that. Bring it back. Keep that in your mind. Keep that as a mantra. You can even say, I'm not asking you to admit fault. In fact, I'm giving you an opportunity to shine, to make yourself look good. So this is part of like priming them for the response that you want. You want the truth. You want to talk about the subject. And I'm going to talk about priming in a moment. But that comment can be very helpful because then you're revealing to them that you're not trying to accuse. You're not asking them to admit fault. You're giving them an opportunity to shine. Now, they may just lie and say, oh, okay, I was working late or whatever. And hopefully it's not a lie. Maybe it was true. But I'm talking about those people, those people. But by saying I'm giving you an opportunity to shine, at least it won't be the redirect back on you so that you're put in the defense. We want to keep you out of the defensive state. Once you get into that defensive state, it can be too late because then you're emotionally triggered, you're emotionally charged, and now you're going down a path that you didn't intend, and then you never get your answer and you never get resolution. So just remember that mantra. Bring it back. You do that in your mind. Bring it back. So you don't get stuck going down a different path. So there's something else that you can also say when they're getting agitated and when they're trying to turn it around on you. Tell them, when you try to change the subject like that, it makes you look guilty. See, now they're going to be conscious of your awareness or aware of your conscientiousness. They're going to be aware that you are more observant than they originally believed. So when you say, when you try to change the subject, it makes you look guilty. You're giving them a chance, again, to shine. You're giving them a chance to make themselves look good. Another thing you can say when they try to turn it back on you is, why do you only bring that up when I'm asking for an explanation about something you did? Why do you only bring that up when I'm asking for an explanation about something you did? Now that's confrontational. I hear you. I know what you're saying. That's not going to work. It's confrontational, but it could work. So just keep that in your arsenal. I don't know. You may have to put this on a little notepad or something, but keep that in your mind because you may have an opening for that. Why do you only bring that up when I'm asking for an explanation about something you did? You always want to bring it back to something I did. You never want to answer something for something that you did. So that's one of the more confrontational ones. Another one is when they're trying to turn it back on you, say, you know what? I know what you're doing. You're trying to put me on the defense so you'll be out of the spotlight. That trick doesn't work on me anymore. So this really highlights what's going on and takes the magic out of the magician, so to speak. Takes the manipulation out of the manipulator. Because if you know what the manipulator's doing and you're calling him or her on it, it's going to be a lot more difficult to reach into that bag of tricks and pull another one on you. I know what you're doing. You're trying to put me on the defense so that you'll be out of the spotlight. That trick doesn't work on me anymore. So this is when it's getting a little bit more heated. You can't get it out. You can't get them to have a normal conversation. You can't get them to talk about the subject. You might have to do something like that. And you know that this type of person, if you're dealing with this or you have someone in your life that does this, they're going to say something like, you're always nagging me. It makes me wonder if you really cared about me. If you did, you'd stop getting on my case all the time. They're going to say things to try to emotionally trigger you. And your natural response is to defend yourself. What? I wouldn't have to nag you if you just tell me where you were last night. So when that happens, again, the mantra, bring it back, because you're going to be triggered, bring it back. And then remember my Tai Chi reference. In Tai Chi, I learned that when energy is coming at you, let's just say a punch or a kick, that instead of blocking it, in Tai Chi, they allow the flow of the punch or the kick to continue forward so that the person throwing it will lose their balance and also expend a lot of energy at the time. And so in Tai Chi, you learn when the punch is coming at you, you turn to the side, the punch goes past you, and then you pull their arm along so they continue in that forward momentum and they fall forward. I mean, that's ideal, but that's the idea, is that you want to help their energy continue forward instead of repelling their energy. It's the energy flow of the conversation. So if they say something that makes you want to defend yourself, instead of saying, that's not true, that stops the energy flow. See, their emotional energy is moving forward. And I'm not talking about, pseudoscience here. I'm talking about the feel of the conversation. You can tell they might want to accuse you or put you in the spotlight. So how do you get their energy to continue flowing in that direction? Because otherwise, as soon as you repel it, then the argument ensues and gets worse. The argument gets more heated because you repelled the energy. It's like putting that stopping motion saying, no, that's not true. And as soon as you say that, there's a big argument. But what you can do is use what I might call a yes, now response. Yes, now. So if they say, well, you're always nagging me, and I wonder if you ever really cared about me because you've always been nagging me since day one. Just say, yes, now. What does that mean? That means, yes, you're probably right. I probably do nag you all the time. Now, let's talk about this subject of you being late, and then we'll talk about my nagging. So all of these things I can put into a yes, now frame. Yes, you're right. I'm helping the energy flow. I'm not repelling them. I'm not objecting to them. I'm just saying, yes, maybe you're right. I'm helping them feel validated, more or less, even though I might not believe it, even though what they're saying might not be true. That's not the point. The point isn't if what they're saying about you is true or not. The point is to allow them to feel validated, understood, and listened to, because that continues the energy flow for them. And so when you say, okay, you know what? I probably have been nagging you since day one. We need to talk about that. You're right. But then you go to the now response. Now, let's talk about the subject at hand. Let's talk about where you were last night. So that brings it back. It validates them and brings it back to you with so much less resistance. And that's what, the Tai Chi reference is all about. How can I offer the least amount of resistance, but keep it on track, keep it on task, bring it back? I do so by making them feel validated, understood, and listened to. And again, what they're saying doesn't necessarily have to be true. You just don't want to put a big wall there to give them something to feed off of. Because once that wall is there, it ignites their flame. I mean, it can. Depends on the person you're dealing with. But the people I'm talking about today, when you put that wall up, when you say, that's not true, and then they say, oh, yes, it is. You've been doing it since day one. Here you are now defending yourself, and all of your energy is being spent. And that's where I'm going to rhyme here for a second, devour your power. That's where they take it away, because now you're in the spotlight and they're throwing you under the bus, and it has nothing to do with them anymore because the rabbit hole is opened up and now you're on a whole new subject matter, and you'll probably never get closure for what you brought up in the first place. So remember the yes, now response. Yes, this is true, or yes, this may be true, or yes, you're probably right. Now let's talk about the subject at hand. So I want you to remember, this is a game. They may not be playing a game, but you have to see it as a game. And what I mean by that is they have strategy to this game, and you may not. So what you have to do is develop strategy. This reminds me of a newsletter I put out a few weeks ago, and it was comparing the human response to the strategic response. The human response is very emotionally triggered, very emotionally charged, becomes defensive, really gets involved, and can really say and do the wrong thing. It's very instinctual. It's very lizard brain. Where the strategic response is basing your response on what you want for an outcome. What do I want for an outcome? And that involves balancing the human response with the strategic response. One's a very dramatic game, and one's a very chess-like game, where you are planning your moves, you're planning your strategy. Because I guarantee you, the manipulative person has been planning this for a long time. They don't even have to think. And if you have no plan, no strategy, you're going to get devoured. You're going to get sucked up, and your energy is going to drain, and your power is going to go away. And you're going to feel lost in any conversation with them. And in order to keep your power, you have to keep your emotional triggers at bay, in check. You need to make sure that when you are triggered, you don't introduce that trigger into the conversation. Very hard to do. Very hard if you're not used to playing this kind of game. Plus, you're probably a compassionate person. If you're listening to this show, you're probably an empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate, caring, loving, supportive person. And so when you are in a conversation with someone that may not have all those qualities, you're going to be very surprised how you keep getting thrown under the bus and they keep dominating the conversation and making you feel bad. This is more along the lines of emotional abuse, and I talk about that at loveandabuse.com. But the point I'm making here is you can meet anyone that's not really intentionally emotionally abusing you, but doesn't want to take responsibility, doesn't want to take the blame, doesn't want to admit any fault. And so they'll turn things around and talk about you or something else, or it's not my fault, it's the government. It's not my fault, it's my mom. It's nothing I did, it's my boss. They take personal responsibility out of the equation. And my comments in this episode are to help them realize their personal responsibility. Not that it's necessarily your job, but if you have to deal with these people, and they're putting you in the spotlight and they're putting you on the defense, when you know it's something they need to fess up to or own up to, then you got to keep your power. You got to bring it back. You got to make them feel validated and understood and listened to so that you can stay in control of you. You can't control them, but you can stay in control of you and staying out of that emotionally triggered state, which is the hardest part. Because you're going to get triggered. I mean, there's just almost no way around it. You're going to get triggered. You just don't introduce that trigger into the conversation, especially with them, because they'll take advantage of that trigger. Once they know that you're emotionally triggered, they'll keep chipping away at it. And so how do you contain that? It's all a mind game. You bring it back into your mind and go, you know what? I need a strategic response here. I got to bring it back to the subject. I can't allow my emotions to dominate this, even though I want to scream, even though I want to cry, even though I just want to yell. I can't do that right now. I have to be more strategic because this person is so darn strategic already. That's really the only way to get some closure in the conversation. And you got to remember, there's a lot of people that you will never, ever get closure with. Ever. There are people out there that you will not be able to, quote, win an argument with, or find closure in a conversation, or get the answers you're looking for. There are people that you can tell them, do you realize when you say that, it hurts me? And they won't care. They won't care if it hurts you. And you have to watch out for those people, because those are the ones that are not accessing empathy or don't even have empathy. You have to watch out for those people because they're never going to show up the way you want them to show up. And you'll probably never win an argument or get closure. So that's just important to remember. Sometimes you have to reach a level of acceptance that that's who they are. You can't get past their strategy. They're too good. It's like a good salesperson. Nothing against salespeople, but salespeople, some of them train to handle objections. They get a lot of no's. And when they get the no, they have to learn how to handle that no. They know that not every prospect is going to want to buy, so they always have a way to handle the objections. Because if they took it personally, they would crumble and they would go broke and they wouldn't be able to eat. So when they say, you know what, this sports car is $90,000, and the mother or father of three is looking at them going, 90,000, I can't afford $90,000. And the salesman goes, oh, you know what? I completely understand. And when you have a family, you got to watch your budget. You know, this is validating the prospect. This is helping the prospect understand that you understand. This is telling the prospect that you're listening to them. Oh, yeah, I completely understand. When you're in that position, I would say the same thing as you. And I also know how I'd feel driving to work in that sports car and how everyone would look at me. So what they did was took that prospect's energy, instead of stopping it and saying, oh, you can't afford it. Well, let's go over here and look at something else you can afford, which is, probably a better answer. But the salesman knows how to handle objections so well that they might be able to convince the prospect to buy the car because they're giving them a good feeling. They're validating and they're doing all the, yes, you're right. Now let's talk about the subject at hand, the yes, now framing. And suddenly the family has this new debt they got to deal with. Hopefully there are a lot of ethical salespeople out there. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that the handling objection part is actually a good skill to learn in any relationship. For example, I was talking about priming before. How do you prime someone? And what does that mean? Priming is getting someone ready for the response that you want. For example, where were you last night? Has no priming at all. You're not preparing that person for that question, and you're not preparing that person to answer in the way you want them to answer, because it's a surprise question and it'll put almost anyone on the defense. So what you need to do is predict what they'll say, predict their defensive behavior, which you can do so by watching their past behavior in similar circumstances. What did they do? What did they say in the past? This is helping you understand how they'll answer in the future. What do they normally say in that predicament? And when you know what they're going to say, you want to create a buffer statement, and that helps you prime the person. Don't worry, I'll explain what all this means. Priming, again, is preparing a person to give you the outcome that you want. So you prime a person to help them respond in the way you want. Priming helps you get the response you want so that they don't take you down the rabbit hole that's hard to crawl out of. And then the buffer statement is something you say to the person to prime them. Let me give you an example. We'll use the where were you last night question. If I wanted to ask you where you were last night, but I know how you respond normally. What do you mean where was I last night? You always ask me that question. I might have to preface it with this buffer statement. I might have to say, I know you're going to get mad when I ask this, but I need to ask you just so I can feel better inside of me. There's a buffer statement. I'm cushioning the blow a little bit. And hopefully at this point, you won't come back at me with anger because I've highlighted that you normally get angry. And what happens when you highlight something that people normally do is they become self-conscious. And if you highlight that behavior, they're not going to want to do the behavior you're highlighting because then that makes you right. And if you're right, now they're wrong. Now they feel wrong. Now they feel in that spotlight again, and they don't want to be there. So a lot of people will likely respond in the opposite way of what you fear happening. So if you fear them getting angry, they're going to respond in the opposite way and not be angry. So this may not lead to the truth, but at least you'll have an opportunity to have a more rational, reasonable conversation about what you're talking about. So a buffer statement like, I know you'll get mad if I ask this, highlights that behavior. You can also say, let's just say that they always bring up like you're nagging or something. You can say, look, I know this is going to sound like I'm nagging. Now they can't say that. They can't use those words. I mean, they might say, yeah, you're right. It does sound like you're nagging. But the energy behind that won't be as potent. And so what you're doing is squashing the energy of their defensiveness. So you do that by priming them with a buffer statement. I'm going to prepare that person to give me the response I want by highlighting or spotlighting how I know they're going to react, which will then in turn make them react another way. So this is interesting. It's a little deep, I know, but all you have to remember is just to ask yourself, how will they respond when I say this? Where were you last night? How will they respond? Oh, they're going to get really angry. All right, that's my buffer statement. I know you're going to get angry when I ask this, but please just help me feel better by telling me where you were last night. So, this isn't going to work with the highly narcissistic people or the people that don't care about you or the people that are compulsive liars. The things I'm talking about today are just to help you get through to most people that probably have some level of caring about you and probably rely on their old tactics that they may or may not even know they're doing. A lot of them do know what they're doing. A lot of them know that if they're redirecting and putting the spotlight back on you, that it takes them out of the place of responsibility. But hopefully some of the tools I shared with you today will be helpful. So I hope it did help. And when we come back, I'm going to say my thank yous and my goodbyes and my last words, which will be pretty much around the emotions that come up. The anger or the sadness or the feelings of betrayal. I'll talk about them really quick because of what we end up doing with those is really important. And we don't want to repress them forever because they cause a lot of harm. So thanks for tuning in today. We'll be right back with my final words after this. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Overwhelmed Brain. I want to thank our sponsor, Total Restore. You can head over to healthygut1.com. That's healthygut1.com and watch a very helpful video. And I want to thank Deshawn for her review on iTunes. Thank you, Deshawn. I appreciate your comments. And I also want to thank Christina for supporting the show through the Patreon program. She renewed her membership. I appreciate you. I appreciate your support. And anyone in the Patreon program that wants to help out, if you've received value by listening to this show, go over to patron.theoverwhelmedbrain.com and choose your method of support. All of it is helpful. You can even make a one-time donation if you would like to do that. And this is not Patreon. It's not Patreon. It's Patron.theoverwhelmedbrain.com. I'm thinking about going on Patreon, but I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know if I need to. Only because I have the Patreon website already set up with all the free resources and the extra episodes and the extra workbooks. All that stuff's over at patron.theoverwhelmedbrain.com. Thank you again, existing supporters. And like I said on the show earlier, go over to Love and Abuse if you are not able to identify what's happening in your relationship and you feel like you're being blamed for everything going wrong with it, or maybe you're in an emotionally abusive situation. You can listen to the podcast called Love and Abuse over at loveandabuse.com. And I also want to remind you the Safe Empowerment System for Anxiety is still available. It will continue to be something that I continue adding modules to up until the end of the year, where I'm hoping to have at least 7 or 8 more pods to add to it to help you relieve your anxiety. And that's what it's all about over at quietbegins.com, the safe empowerment system for social anxiety that has evolved into all anxiety. So check it out when you get a chance, quietbegins.com. And finally, I'd like to thank Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com for some of the music transitions in The Overwhelmed Brain. And like I said, I wanted to address the emotions that come up when you're in a conversation with someone who wants to dominate or turn it around on you, put you on the defense. Interesting thing about someone who wants to dominate a conversation, I think I talked about it on this show, a few weeks ago or a few months ago. When you're in a conversation with someone that's dominating, they keep talking and talking and talking, and you have a hard time trying to exit the conversation. The most effective way that I've found to exit one of those conversations is to become the dominator. And that's another thing that's hard to do. It's hard to be that way when you're not that way. But if you're in this conversation and someone's like, oh yeah, and I did this, and then I did this, and then I'm going to go over here and see this movie, and then I'm going to go to work, and you're like, oh geez, I can't stand here the whole time listening to this. And then they're in the middle of a story, and I can't get out of that story because they need to finish that story. It's time for you to step up and say, oh, you know what? When I did that, I was 12 years old and we snuck in the movie theater, and then you dominate it. But as you're dominating, it's a bad way to put it, but pretty much what's happening. As you're dominating that conversation, as you take it over, you lead yourself out of it. This is the point where you exit. Oh yeah, and then all of us, we were laughing, but you know what? I got to go. And now you have your exit. So that's just a little side note for someone, and it has nothing to do with this episode, but I wanted to throw that in there just in case you missed it last time, is that sometimes you're in a conversation with someone who doesn't let you go. So it's not really associated with the stuff we're talking about today, but maybe it is. Maybe that personality type is in there. So you become the dominator. You step in and control the conversation so that you can say, well, I got to go now. And they're going to respond probably favorably, because dominating people, that's how they do it. And when they see a mirror reflection of them doing what they do, it's not going to faze them as much as if you did that to somebody else. So just remember that too. Sometimes you have to be the person that you want to get away from in order to get away from them. So again, that's an aside. That's something that I just threw in there because the dominating part came up a couple of times in the episode, controlling, dominating. And it can be difficult to lead a conversation and keep your power if this person doesn't drop their tactic or strategy in how to communicate. And so you might have to use their strategy. Just forget I said that if it doesn't help. So the concept, your emotions. Yes, your emotions come into play when you become emotionally triggered. So when you're with someone that is emotionally triggering you with their comments, with their turning it around on you, putting you on the defense, you'll feel angry, you'll feel hurt, you might feel betrayed, you'll feel a number of emotions. These are often difficult to get rid of because you might be talking to a liar and you know they're lying, but you don't want them to lie. And you may be holding a denial inside of you. So what ends up happening is you end up fighting yourself. And maybe they're not a liar. Maybe they're just defensive. And you know they're defensive and you don't want them to be. You just want to have a normal conversation. And so what ends up happening is you get these feelings inside of you, these emotions build up. And it's about them, but it's really inside you about you. Because there's a certain level of acceptance that you haven't come to that this is the type of person they are. Or at least this is the behavior that they do over and over again, and you so want it to change. You so want to get along with them, and you keep expecting some other type of behavior out of them, and they never do it. They never give it. And because they never give it, you're disappointed, and your expectations aren't met, or your hopes and dreams and prayers or wishes aren't met. And so you become disappointed, and then you fight with yourself. It's like you resist what's happening. You resist how they're being. You don't come to an acceptance with what they're doing. And what ends up happening is that you feel like you have no power. You have no choice. And so you end up repressing those negative emotions. Again, this is all inside you. You end up fighting with yourself. You hope that they'll change. You don't meet your own hope. You don't meet your own expectations, or they don't. And you disappoint yourself. I'm disappointed that this person didn't change. Or I'm angry that this person is doing that behavior again. That shows a huge lack of acceptance that that's who they are and that's who they'll always be. Or that's how they'll always behave. That may not be true. Their behavior could change. They could learn. But if you don't come to an acceptance that that's who they're being now, that's when you end up fighting yourself. And the more you hope, ponder, wonder, speculate, or contemplate, the longer you stay in negativity. You hope they change. You ponder what it would be like if they did change. You wonder if they'll ever change. You speculate if they'll change, and you contemplate them changing because you hope that they'll figure something out, but it never happens. And it's all these disappointments, all this sadness that you end up repressing, and you stay in the negativity. And when you hold on to that, because you're hoping for change, you often hold on to it for far too long and never see what you're really looking at. You see it, you just don't want to accept it. because accepting it means that you made choices in your life that didn't work out. And if that's the case, maybe you'll have to admit that you're not really that happy or that satisfied with this relationship. Or maybe you'll feel stupid. Maybe you'll feel like you were conned. And all of this is that inner battle that you need to rise above. You need to get out of that space. And in order to get out of that space, you look at someone and you accept, that's who they are. I can't get past who they are. I can't get past how they're behaving. They may change one day, but today is not that day. That's who they are, and that's who they'll be. So the next time I have this conversation with them, that's who they're going to be again. So I want to stay out of this negative emotional state. How do I do it? I accept that they won't change. I accept that no matter what I say, that's how they're going to respond. What does that do? That puts the burden of responsibility of your happiness and your life on you, which is really where it should be. Because expecting certain people to change could be a lifelong waiting game. And when you are able to let them go and let them be, and whatever they're doing has nothing to do with you, but everything to do with them, and what you do is tell yourself that you need to stop relying on someone else to change before you'll be happy. Because you want to get out of that cycle. You want to get out of that hamster on a wheel thought process. Because if you're always waiting for someone to change, you're never, ever happy. I'm not saying this is the key to happiness, but it sure is a pretty darn good step toward it. Accepting someone else's behavior the way it is and the way it will always be takes you out of resistance, takes you out of inner conflict, and it takes you out of expecting something that will probably never happen. And that is accepting a huge loss sometimes. That might require grieving a loss of something that you hoped would be, but it isn't. The greatest part about that is that once you grieve it, once you accept that that person's not going to change, if they do change, if they suddenly realize what they're doing is hurtful and they feel bad about it, or is deceptive or is manipulative, and they're aware of it finally, and they do want to change and they do want help, then you'll be more ready than ever to accept the new relationship, whatever it is, whether you're together or not, whether you're associating anymore or not, relating anymore or not. You'll be in a new space in yourself because you will have healed from whatever was going on inside of you that kept you in that vicious cycle. And that healing is the most important. That's why sometimes the fastest path to healing is acceptance that things will never change. That's hard because we want things to change. But if I accept that that person won't change, then I'll stop waiting for them to change, which means I have to start making decisions for myself. You know, it's not that things won't ever change. Change is a constant. Change is always happening. It's just that some people get stuck in their ways. Some people don't want to change. And don't be that person. If you are stuck in a cycle and you're continually disappointed, your expectations are continually unmet, maybe it's time to change your perspective and change your expectations so that other people aren't triggering you to expect anything more than they can possibly do. So it's not that nothing ever changes. Everything changes all the time. It's just that people in your life, including yourself, can stop the change that needs to happen in order for progress to take place. And when you have those kind of people in your life, you need to look at, am I going with the flow of the changes, or am I stuck in this pattern? Am I stuck in this loop? Once you get out of that loop, you're in a much better space. Once you reach that place of acceptance that this person won't change or this thing will never change, you find healing inside because you go through grieving. You know, it's a tough process, but you go through the stages of grieving and then you go through the stages of healing. As long as you're always working on yourself, you'll get there. And then when you're on the other side of that, you notice that there are changes and you realize how much better life can be, and you're more prepared to deal with any further changes that come along. Or in the case of people, when they don't change, are you going to stick around while they stay the same? This is all tough stuff. Relationships can be hard. And that's why I keep doing this show. That's why I want you to keep listening. And no matter what, keep an open mind, because this will help you step into your power. It also helps you be firm in your decisions and actions so that you can create the life you want. always take steps to grow and evolve. You are powerful beyond measure. And above all, and this is something I absolutely know to be true about you, you are amazing.